Welcome to the fourth video in the 10 Reasons You Need Fusion series. Another great reason for using Fusion is its range of colour correction tools, which are not only easy to use for solving everyday practical problems, but can also be very creative. And it's not just the simple stuff. Fusion allows you to really get to grips with even the most complicated colour correction challenges. So whether you need to do some selective colour correction, create a new look for your film, white balance a shot, or just check that what is going out is within legal limits, Fusion makes it all dead simple. Let me show you what I mean.
The first colour correction tool we'll have a look at is the brightness contrast tool. So I've got a shot here loaded into the left-hand view window, and I'll just load the output of the brightness contrast tool into the right-hand window. This is a great tool if you want to do very simple things like changing the mood of this shot by adjusting the gamma, the contrast and the saturation to make it look a bit more wintry, for instance. It's great, of course, that you can see these shots side by side. The other thing you can do is to take a second shot here and again go to the brightness contrast controls. Now I may be adjusting the saturation or brightness, etc., but since this is for video output, I need to check what the levels are. So if I load the output into the second window, I can change the view on this to a vector scope. So now, if I make changes, I can see quite clearly what's happening legally to this particular shot. And that's vital when you are in production for broadcast. If I go back to views, I can change it to a waveform, for instance. And once again, if I'm adjusting brightness or contrast, I can be happy that what is going out is well within legal limits. A lot of the time with colour correction you are just trying to fix shots or just make shots look a bit better, really. I've got a good example here of a shot that just needs a little bit of correction. You can see the original in the left-hand viewer here. If we just add a colour corrector and load the output into the right-hand viewer, the first thing we can do is look at the levels. It's quite clear from the graph that everything is in the mid-range. And I can correct that very easily by pulling in the arrows on the left-hand right-hand side. Instantly the shot looks a lot more punchy, with better blacks and whites. I can continue by using colour curves to white balance the shot. This time what I will do is pick a colour, or more accurately what should be a mid-grey in the shot, so somewhere around the cheek section that looks like originally it was grey. That is then displayed on the graph to the right. All it remains for me to do is to go through the RGB graphs one at a time and reset the point so that it falls on the zero axis, i.e. no colour at that point. In the original there is clearly too much red and green in the greys, so if I pull the point down to the midway line, you'll see the shot correcting itself as I do so. So there I now have the final shot, colour corrected and white balanced. And of course if I have a number of shots all shot at the same time, all I have to do is use the same nodes to correct them as well. So here you can see the original and the final of the second shot already done. Something else that's also extremely useful inside Fusion is the ability to colour match two separate shots. Here are a couple of shots of some beach rope that's been taken at different times of the day, and you can see that they don't match. This is a classic case of something that needs to work if I'm to use both shots in my video. I can use the colour curves tool again, so if I just feed the other shot into the second input of the colour curves tool and select match reference, what then happens is that it'll translate the colour setup from one clip to the other and match the two shots. So I've been able to match those two shots pretty easily without too much effort at all. This is something I use all the time during an edit when I have to match footage shot at different times of the day. There are also some very creative aspects of colour correction that are worth looking at as well. For instance, if you take a shot like this one and want to do something a little more interesting to it, you can use colour suppression to highlight some of the colours. Here we can take out all of the blues and the cyans, plus the magenta and green, gradually suppressing most of the colour so that I can highlight just the red and yellow crayons. And that of course is incredibly useful with a blue or a green screen, where before keying you may want to suppress all of the blue or green in the shot. Again, I can simply suppress all that, ready for keying, and you can see the result of that here in the final comp. Another example which is quite common is the ability to color correct a shot in order to, in this case, change the seasons. So I can adjust the hue manually using the wheel here, or use the hue slider. So if I want to create a more autumnal look, I can change the hue to brown and increase the saturation in order to get a rich brown for the leaves. The logical extension of that technique, of course, is to do night for day on a shot. So we can use a combination of a brightness contrast tool plus a color curves node to create the effect that I want. So a good range of color correction tools for fixing shots, making them look a lot punchier, and for creative techniques like night for day, all easily achieved and incredibly flexible inside Fusion. Another aspect of color correction may not actually be found in the color correction tools themselves, but instead in the merge tool. For instance, if you take a shot like this one and just want to make it look a bit more dynamic or punchy, a very simple technique is to just key it over itself and use the merge tool to get the effect you want. Currently, it's just merging the shot over itself. But if I go to the apply mode, I can change this to say multiply, and instantly we get a much better shot with much better blacks. So to some extent I am color correcting here by using merge. I can also, as I've already set up here, add a blur tool into the mix in order to give it a slightly soft focus. But notice how easy all that was. Fusion also works across multiple bit depths. So here we have a 32-bit float HDR image, and if we connect a brightness contrast tool to it and have a look at this in two views, I can make one of them a 3D histogram. With that loaded, I can see exactly what's going on in there, and as you might imagine, there is a huge range of values available in the shot. This is a good example of the range that Fusion will deal with, particularly since there is a lot of detail both in the blacks and the whites. And without too much trouble I can bring all that detail out, both in the dark parts of the church together with the highlights of the stained glass window. This of course is vital when working in film visual effects, where you need to preserve the entire dynamic range of the source material. That aspect that I just showed you with the church example is also very useful even when working with an 8-bit shot. Let's use this shot as an example, which is a 720 by 576 8-bit piece of video. I'll add a glow to it and view that in the window. What has happened, of course, is that where the glow has had most effect, the whites are pretty burnt out. So if I was to subsequently add a brightness contrast tool to the comp and try and take the gain down, the whites will just go grey since there is no detail left in that part of the shot. At this stage, however, I can go back to the original shot and instead of working 8-bit, I can switch it to float 32. You'll notice now that all the detail comes back and you get a nice subtle soft glow as a result, since we've extended the dynamic range of the shot. However, if you are worried that I have to work solely in 32-bit float, with all the rendering time penalties that might incur, then all I have to do is put a change depth node into the comp and switch it back to 8-bit. So the front section is processing in 32-bit float, while the rest of the comp can revert to 8-bit. A very useful technique and one that really shows the power and flexibility of Fusion.
So, as you have just seen, Fusion contains a phenomenal range of color correction tools. Everything you need to do quick and simple corrections, white balancing and level adjustments, right through to the most amazing and creative looks, which you can share with the rest of your team working on the same production. Advanced apply modes take color correction one stage further in the creative stakes. And finally, you've seen firsthand Fusion's ability to work in different bit depths and color spaces for the ultimate control of your color correction. That's it for this video. In the next video, we'll be going through keying and matte control. Meanwhile, don't forget to take a closer look at our website at www.ionline.com. Plus the Ion YouTube channel, where you can find a whole host of news, events and information that will show you why Ion Software is a world leader in compositing.